It's being called the Circumcision Wars, an extraordinary event that's happening in November. A group called NGM has garnered enough signatures to put forward a bill that would ban circumcision in San Francisco. The leader of the group, called MGM, is Matthew Hess, who professes that it is not anti-Semitic in nature, this bill, but rather humanitarian, to avoid genital mutilation. Those are his words. As a matter of fact, after they do this, they will proceed ahead to Santa Monica. This and a visit with a renowned Mexican photographer and his son, Moy and Gabrielle Volcovich. Stay with us. We're back with Menschlife TV. My guests are Dr. Aaron Jesin and Professor Leo Davids. And the topic, which is raging hot, is circumcision. Before we go any further on the pros and cons, if there are any pros and cons, which we will discover, Dr. Jesin, tell us exactly what you do and how you do it.
So I do both ritual and non-ritual circumcision.
Where do you do it?
So ritual circumcision mostly is done in people's homes, synagogues, party rooms. It's a big affair. So very rarely in my office. The other circumcisions, non-ritual, they're usually done in my office. I have a circumcision clinic aside from a family practice.
Who comes to you?
So I have all kinds of people. People come for cultural reasons. I get, in the circumcision clinic, I get Muslims who come for their religious reasons.
But how old are they, Muslims, when they're circumcised?
Well, I only do infants. In my clinic, I only do up to the age of 6 months. A lot of them come, the fathers, they tell me that when they were younger, theirs was done when they were 6 years old or 7 years old. There are different traditions. I think some Muslims, they either have it in infancy or certain ages up to the age of 13. They have to be done by the age of 13.
13.
Which was the age Ishmael was when he had his done.
So a large part of your practice is not Jewish.
Correct, that part of my practice.
And people are convinced that it's a good thing, that means.
That's correct.
How do you go about circumcising a baby?
So I don't know how graphic you want the details, but basically, physically, what you do is you remove, all it is, we don't, people talk about mutilation, we don't touch the penis at all. It's removal of the foreskin.
Is it terribly painful?
In an 8-day-old infant, the pain is minimal. I won't say it's non-existent. There are studies where, they try to equate pain with oxygen consumption, and they show differences. So maybe there's some pain. Certainly, any study you read that tells you that the pain is so bad that they have psychological issues till they're adults, I think that there's no truth in those. But they're not without pain, and certainly when the babies are a little bit older, as I said, I do them up to the age of 6 months. So we use anesthesia. We use local cream, and I do an injectable block also. I block the nerves to the penis, so the procedure becomes virtually painless.
How about danger of complications? Does that happen?
There is a complication rate. It's fairly small, and the majority of the complications are minor. Infection, sometimes bleeding. Bleeding, if it's a complication, is always controlled. It's never a long-term complication. There are potentially more serious complications, but they're very, very rare, extremely rare, way more rare than the positive benefits.
Are you aware of the debate about circumcision?
Yes.
The fact that people are saying it's barbaric, it's mutilation, and that it's a myth that there is value in it.
I'm aware that this debate has been going on since the time of the Greeks and even earlier, so it's not at all a brand new debate. If you ask me, I believe very strongly that a lot of it is steeped in anti-Semitism. People who say that it's not anti-Semitic, I don't think they're being honest with themselves. Having said that, circumcision, if it's for religious reasons, then we don't really have a choice, both Muslims and Jews.
Well, where did this come from for religious reasons? It's so strong that when I was in the former Soviet Union, while it was still the Soviet Union, at terrible risk to themselves, people would circumcise their sons in forests, in basements, and yet they hardly knew what being Jewish meant. That's how strong it was. Where does it come from?
Well, actually, if we look at the original biblical text, it's in the book of Genesis, chapter 17. And I'll read a few sentences here from my little handy-dandy English language Bible. And it reads in verse 9, chapter 17, God said to Abraham, "And as for thee, thou shalt keep my covenant, thou and thy seed after thee throughout their generations." Verse 10, "This is my covenant, which you shall keep between me and you and thy seed after thee. Every male among you shall be circumcised." Verse 11, "You shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a token of a covenant betwixt me and you. And he that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you, every male throughout your generations," etc. And then in verse 14, to wrap up this little paragraph, it reads, "And the uncircumcised male who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, that soul shall be cut off from his people. He hath broken my covenant." So that's the original
It's so
text.
strong that the uncircumcised one is a pariah, is no longer considered a Jew.
That sort of idea, yes. Yes. "Hath broken my covenant." That's what the text says. We actually find references to circumcision in later parts of the Bible. There's an interesting passage as well in Joshua, which is after Moses. Joshua, the first book of Nach, the part that follows the 5 books of Moses. And in chapter 5, you get verse 2. "At that time the Lord said unto Joshua, Make thee knives of flint, and circumcise again the children of Israel the second time." Now, I don't know that you can circumcise anybody the second time. But
Can you circumcise a second? And why would you?
No, if you've done it right the first time, there is no second time.
Right. So the text says, well, what are we talking about? Second time? How can this be? In verse 4 here, Joshua 5, verse 4, "This is the cause why Joshua is circumcised. All the people that came forth out of Egypt that were males, even all the men of war, died in the wilderness by the way, after they came forth out of Egypt." Verse 5, "All the people that came out were circumcised. But all the people that were born in the wilderness, as they came forth out of Egypt, had not been circumcised." Verse 6, "The children of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness, till all the nation, even the men of war that came forth out of Egypt, were consumed, because they hearkened not unto the voice of the Lord," and so on and so on. And verse 7, "He raised up their children in their stead, them did Joshua circumcise. For they were uncircumcised, because they had not been circumcised by the way." In other words, during the 40 years in the desert, circumcision was not practiced.
This is pretty strong.
Yeah, this was important.
It
hadn't
couldn't
been
be
done.
stronger.
It had to be a catch-up kind of thing in times of Joshua for the circumcisions that had not occurred during Moses' time during the desert. They were wandering in the desert. They lived in tents. Maybe they were afraid of something, and they didn't do circumcisions during the desert years. So this is here in Joshua 5.
So ultimately, it's a leap of faith that we as Jews do because God told us that this is how we make a covenant with Him.
It's the sign of the covenant. In other words, the covenant is a kind of a spiritual intangible. But when you have something which is in the world that's actually visible, that's the sign of the covenant. Something you can actually see. Okay, this child's a little different from the other children in a very tiny bit.
Why is it so? Why does it have to be so bloody? Why does it have to be so? Do you have thoughts on that? There's no evidence, of course, of why we do this, or what even predates it. But do you have any thoughts on why this particular?
See, if you have
practice?
a ring on your finger, or a chain around your neck, or a pin to put on, a metal pin, all these are off your body sometimes. They can be forgotten, they can be lost. Unless you do something which is sort of built into the body without causing any real harm, you don't have something that 24/7 is always there. So if you had a sign of the covenant which was movable, it could be lost, it could be left behind, it could be dropped down the drain. Who knows what happens? Here you do something in the body which, as I say, doesn't do any harm at all, and which is always there. So that's why you need something physical.
So two quick thoughts on that. First of all, it's said that when King David went to the ritual bath, to the mikveh, he was naked. He was very despondent because he said, when I'm naked, I haven't got any commandments to... And
no tzitzit, no nothing.
Right. So all the visual thing, and then he remembered he had a circumcision. So that was, as always. Professor Davids pointed out, he always had that. That's one thing. And the second thing is that nothing is necessarily easy. And things, things that are worthwhile may come with a little bit of pain, with a little bit of blood, with a little bit of sweat. We have to act. There's another story that one of the kings asked Rabbi Akiva, why, if God wanted you to be circumcised, why didn't He create you that way? So of course the answer was, when you don't go out to the field and eat the wheat, cut the wheat and just eat it. You take it and you work it, and things aren't perfect. It's all a covenant between man and God. Each one has to contribute. So you have to do something. You have to
part of the justification for this group, this MGM group that's advocating the anti-circumcision bill, is that a baby is not giving his consent. It's the parent that's making the decision for the baby, and that there should be an age limitation to that. I want to leave you with that question, with the break, and come back to it when we come back. Okay. Tangible of our covenant with God. But a baby is not a conscious sentient being, is a conscious sentient being, but not a verbal being. It's the parent that makes the covenant with God, not the baby. Why do we do it? Why do we give it so much credence?
Well, number one, if we start with the biblical text, the covenant is handed on with the golden chain of the generations because it is precisely the parents who do this for the baby, with the baby, and the baby then grows up into a covenant that it is already sort of part of. So in that sense, the little boy grows up with the eventual knowledge that they are part of something that's been going for a very long time, for thousands of years. Now, one other comment in terms of why do it, to a little baby and not wait till they're 10 or 15.
Like the Muslims, 13? Or some Muslims?
Up to 13.
Up to 13?
It's a lot easier and simpler and less dangerous and risks of anything when it's done with a little baby who, very small body, very small foreskin, it just goes quickly. Later on, if you do it with an adult, it becomes more complicated, more chance of difficulties, which Dr. Jesin has to speak to, not myself. But I think one reason is simply, with a little child, it's just a lot easier. You dealt with it, and you really don't have a lot of problems.
Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'd like to add one thing. There's a sentence that we say at a ritual circumcision, it gets repeated a few times, and it says, as we have bring the baby into the covenant, so shall you merit to raise him. And the rabbis ask, what's the connection? And the connection actually speaks to this question, and it speaks to something that may be wrong with today's society. We live in a laissez-faire society today where people say you shouldn't decide for kids, let them decide themselves, just show them everything and they have to somehow magically decide what the right things are. We don't believe in that in Judaism. We believe that parents have a responsibility. So just like when your son is 8 days old, it's prescribed. He has to have his circumcision, his bris, and that's what you have to do. That's the right thing to do. So he brings it, and then the responsibility is to bring him up to the rest of the life. So you do have to teach him all the things. He still has free choice, but you want to skew that free choice. You have a responsibility to skew that free choice so he makes proper choices. So there's nothing wrong with circumcising him at 8 days because it happens to be the right thing to do, and it's our responsibility. So, to wait till he's 18 and let him decide, he'll be confused. And it's just like, so when he's 4 and 5 years old, you start to take him to synagogue. So when he's 15, he can still decide to go or not to go, but he's used to the right way. And you've at least done your responsibility as a parent.
Okay, here's what Rabbi Chaim Steinmetz says. He's an Orthodox rabbi from Montreal, and he writes this in his blog. I'm a modern Orthodox rabbi who talks a great deal about the place of Judaism in the 21st century. But increasingly, I've come to realize that circumcision is incompatible with the times, as is much of Judaism. What's your reaction?
I'm not sure he's really an Orthodox rabbi. I mean, that's his description. Whose else's description? I don't understand that statement. Judaism changes, it interprets its ancient laws in terms of modern science, in terms, when we talk about keeping the Sabbath, when there's no electricity is not the same as keeping it today. But the tenets don't change. They're still there.
Do you have any comment, any reaction?
Well, I think clearly the sentiment expressed in that blog is
incompatible with 21st century.
Right. It's very much classic reform thinking as we knew it in the 1800s. When reform became a powerful movement in Europe in the 1800s, the real argument was that we have to be modern and up to date and with the times, and if the general society doesn't approve of X or Y, then X or Y has to go. And reform actually, started that way. The question is where our standards come from, what criteria we use. If you go by sort of majority vote or what people think, then you may find that a lot of things that are part of your tradition are not thought well of anymore or are considered to be archaic or medieval.
Obsolete.
And then people will simply take a walk. On the other hand, an Orthodox Jew says that despite the fact that the currents of public opinion may go where they go, and that today people think, well, today we do X and Y and not something else, we have to stick to our principles. Our principles are given to us, in the Bible as something handed down by the Creator, and that should not be allowed to be pushed or thrown out by public opinion or today's fashion.
What's his name? Matthew Hess. Oh, yes. By the way, who says he's not anti-Semitic and has written a comic book featuring 4-skinned men dressed like Superman battling the Mohel monster. That's you. But he's not anti-Semitic.
Right.
They're claiming that it's a myth that circumcision is dubious, the benefits are dubious, and that a lot of it is mythology. What would you say, Dr. Jesin?
I think he doesn't read modern scientific journals. I mean, increasingly, even 30 or 40 years ago, we used to think it was clean air. We said we didn't have direct evidence. We definitely never had evidence that it was harmful, unless for people who were just looking to prove it. It was never definitely harmful. There may be a small complication rate.
Hemophiliacs or somebody.
Right, but it's not harmful. Having said that, today especially with all the evidence mounting, I think in the last about 20, 25 years, every World Conference on AIDS has had a paper written, a scientific paper written how in couples where the male is circumcised, the transmission of AIDS and other sexually transmitted diseases is phenomenally reduced. So there are benefits. Are they? That's one. That's the new phenomenal benefit, to the point where it's now recommended in everyone in Africa, where AIDS is a huge epidemic, that all males be circumcised, and they have huge clinics. So that's one thing. So somebody like this, he claims to be not anti-Semitic, but his eyes are closed, and he is obviously anti-Semitic. It's the only basis for this. And there are other benefits. There's virtually no cancer of the penis in circumcised males. It's not a common cancer anyways, you might say, so that benefit is not phenomenal. But the point is there are benefits. Whether you have to recommend that everyone be circumcised, probably not. It's better to recommend that they practice safe sex or that they keep to one partner, and that's fine, but it's certainly not harmful, and there are benefits. Anyone who says that that's not true is just not willing to look at the evidence.
Back in a minute. Stay with us. We're back talking about circumcision and the benefits. You started to list, especially the latest discoveries with AIDS, that they're even thinking of circumcising adult males in Africa to stop the spread.
That's correct.
What other benefits are there?
So I think there's one other one that I hadn't really mentioned, and there seems to be a statistically significant reduction in the incidence of urinary tract infections in babies who are circumcised. Again, how important that is, It's there. Sometimes, in fact, males I've had people come for circumcision, they were recommended by their doctors because they've had repeated urinary tract infections. And there are other problems in later adult life which can lead to medically necessary circumcisions. It's a benefit, not necessarily enough. Maybe the AIDS one is enough to say that everyone should be circumcised, certainly in Africa where it's an epidemic.
But anyway, they're expanding on a mythology. They're creating a mythology. They're creating something to defend their stance on circumcision being genital mutilation.
Correct.
What about female circumcision?
Well, there's no comparison. That's,
Is there
that's a bad
benefit
word.
in female circumcision?
No, because that's not really circumcision, it's mutilation. See, the difference is in male circumcision, you're cutting skin, and female circumcision, which is a bad comparison, the word is not right, you're actually mutilating the genitalia. It's not the same at all.
And yet they're couching it in the same framework.
Sure, they'd like to, because then they can say that's the way they become socially acceptable, and try to say that it's not, certainly everyone is against female circumcision, for lack of a better word. And so if they compare them, then they can make everyone against male circumcision, but they're not the same thing at all.
It's a ploy. So what does this mean?
Well, actually, we have a parallel situation. When you look at the argument that's now raging in Holland about shechita, about ritual slaughter, and the one house of parliament in Holland has passed a bill to ban ritual slaughter, which would affect a lot of Muslims in Holland and a few Jews. I mean, there's some tens of thousands of Jews. The Muslims are a much larger population. And the argument is, well, it's painful for the animal and this and that. We have to do stunning first. Now, the rabbinical experts on shechita, on ritual slaughter, have said that stunning in general renders the animal non-kosher because it, will cause a damage to the brain or to the skull or whatever, and therefore the animal, even though slaughtered properly later, has already been pre-damaged and becomes treifa, which means it's already got a fatal wound, etc. And so there are all problems with that. So the animal rights people in Holland have said, well, we've got to keep the animals from pain, etc. Now, I would say to them, if you really want animals not to be pained, stop eating meat and say, we and our guests and our friends will not use the animals for food at all. And if you dry up the demand for meat, then you won't have to worry about, slaughtering animals. On the other hand, if you say, I want meat, but it's got to be done this way and that way, you are putting at a very bad disadvantage those religious groups that feel that there's a problem in that their halal or kosher rules do not permit the stunning process before the slaughtering. Now, again, is it anti-Semitism? Is it just sort of animal cruelty, humanitarian? It's hard to know. It's hard to know. We can only speculate on people's motives. We do know this is being argued, and that in Holland today, it's got to go to the other House of Parliament, it's got to get approval, it's being studied, but certainly there has been one vote saying we want to abolish ritual slaughter without stunning. If you don't stun, we won't let you proceed, which means that kosher Jews in Holland, if this passes, and if it's allowed to go through as is, would presumably have to import their kosher meat from other countries. They would have to bring it in from Belgium or Germany or wherever.
In both those cases, it's an attempt, conscious or unconscious in the case of Holland, we don't know for sure, give them the benefit of a doubt, it's an attempt to sabotage the very foundation of what we believe. Is this on the rise? Do you see more of it today than when you were kids?
I think it's fashion comes and goes. I mean, I alluded before that it's old. It started in the time of the Greeks.
They were against circumcision?
There were a lot of groups against circumcision. Against circumcision in the time of the Greeks. There were people who wanted to find ways to regrow or to reverse the procedure way back then. And seemingly now as well, too, things wax and wane. One of the ways I gauge this is is by the number of times I get invited to TV shows. It used to be a lot, it was less now it's again. Also by the emails I get through my website. I have a website and people send me emails, sometimes hate stuff about my mutilation of babies. They say, so sometimes I used to get a lot and then I didn't get for a few years and then I get again here and there.
So this is nothing new to you?
It's nothing new.
You've been personally attacked for what you do.
Yes, there was a website once said that that people who do circumcision should be removed from the streets. It was almost a threat to kill, or should be. I think they even said should be killed. And then he gave names and addresses of people in Canada and the United States who did this. I think I was number 2 on the list, in a separate, it was out of Saskatchewan.
Does it make you scared?
No. Although it should maybe a little bit, because that happened in the field of abortion. It was the same thing, and then that doctor
and he did get killed.
Yeah.
So right now, is there an increase?
No, actually, it's been my email has been actually quiet the last few years, much quieter than it had been for a long time.
Although this is Canada.
Right. Although the stuff now with San Francisco and California, in general, maybe it'll be on the rise again.
And there must be so many of them, because this is a grassroots group. They got together enough signatures to create a momentum, to create a bill, and the MGM bill that will go in November for a vote. And that's what I find alarming, that then they want to transfer this to Santa Monica and presumably to have a growth movement around the country. Do you think they'll succeed? Leo?
Well, it's guesswork, obviously, but I must say that you have some people who feel that these religious requirements, which have been handed down for so long, whether it be Jewish, Muslim, and so on, are important and that they should be respected. I don't think that there are that many people of ill will out there, or anti-Semites, or anything of the sort. My guess is that these referenda, if they pass, would pass by a pretty narrow margin. So I don't think that there's that much sentiment out there against. I also think that many, many people in the general population have either been circumcised themselves as infants, have circumcised their children, etc., and they feel good about it, and they feel it's appropriate, whether for religious reasons or health reasons, whatever. So I don't know, but I must tell you that it's scary to see that now the people fighting the Jewish practices are not just, non-Jews. They are Jewish people who are estranged from the Judaic tradition, estranged from the Bible, rabbinic text, etc., and are in the forefront of the struggle sort of against Judaic practices. And this is scary. People with, distinctly Jewish names, etc., who take the forefront in saying, well, we want to be against this, we want to abolish it, we want to... In other words, people who have come back to the 1800s reform philosophy of, if it's not modern, if it's not considered fashionable and acceptable today, we're going to throw it out. And the fact that, hoary tradition from way back speaks otherwise, if you reform, you say, well, that doesn't bother me too much. And of course, reform has modified its stance in a number of areas since the heyday of the early to mid 1800s, but we're still getting this type of anti-reaction led by many Jews. That's scary.
But, Leo, do you really think that that's a new thing? Also, Jews have always been at the forefront of everything, forefront of civil rights, forefront of, unfortunately, anti-Semitic movements, forefront of anti-Israel movements. There's always Jews in there. It's sad, but it's not new.
It's a reality, and at that we have to finish. I thank you so much for enlightening and informing us. Dr. Jesin, Professor Davids, thank you again. My guests today are Moy Volcovich and his son Gabriel. Welcome to Menschlife TV.
Thank you.
I'm delighted that you're here and not in Mexico. This is a fairly recent decision, although you immigrated, how many years ago now?
Almost 8 years.
Almost 8 years. You've decided finally to put your roots down here and start a studio.
Yeah.
And you, on your own, have developed, and we'll talk about that, At only 16, you already had an award-winning documentary, but we'll get to that in a minute. Moy, the government of Mexico has commissioned you with many projects over the years, but the last one you did is something that is absolutely touching the soul, and that is going across Mexico and asking children how they feel about God, how they feel about liberty, about freedom, about the essential things in life. And you did the filming, Gabrielle.
Yeah, exactly. So I did. I conducted. I was carrying the tripod all the time with my camera. I set it up. I did the interviews. My dad conducted the interviews, and I composited the shots together. Sorry.
So you went and interviewed all levels of society?
All levels of society, all different kind of religions in Mexico. Even Mexico is maybe 95% they are Catholics. There are different kind of Catholicism in Mexico. Even there are Christians, even there are Jews.
But right now, talking about Jews, we're seeing another project that you've just completed, and that's the synagogues of Mexico. Or we're back to the first project.
No,
this is Mexico.
We're going back to the synagogues. There we go.
So we're mixing it up as we're talking, but that's okay, because, this is extraordinary.
Yeah, this is a nice synagogue.
Where is this?
This is in Mexico City. Most of the Jewish community live in Mexico City. Actually, in Mexico, there are 45,000 Jews, divided in 3 different communities.
What are they?
They are the Sephardic, that they are split actually in 3. Sephardics that came from Syria, and from Syria there are 2 Sephardics, Halevis and Shamis, and there are the Sephardics that came from Spain or from that kind of the same countries. They spoke Ladino, this kind, and the other ones spoke Arabic. Even I come from my father was born in Poland, and from my mother's side, she's a Syrian background.
So you were split?
Yeah, split. Yeah, my grandfather came to Mexico in 1910 during the revolution in Mexico.
And the other 2 communities?
The other 2 are the Ashkenaz, that they are just one. When they move to Mexico, maybe they have the different kind, but now they just grabbing one Ashkenaz community. And they are the conservative Jews that we just have 2 in Mexico. We don't have any reform.
We're looking at the children now. It's just fascinating.
Yeah.
What part of Mexico is this?
This is north of Mexico. This is Chihuahua. Also, this one, this is Chihuahua. In a little town that called Skrill. It's amazing.
And we're back now to...
No, this is actually a Jewish boy who had his bar mitzvah in Mexico City.
Mexico,
it's also part for the...
I don't know.
It was part of the project.
That's part of the project, yeah.
What's the tattoo on his cheek?
That picture is every 28 of every single month in Mexico City. They go to a specific church. It calls San Judas Tadeo, and all the kids every 28 they go to pray to Jesus in the synagogue.
And this is the mark?
It's like just like fun. It's not a tattoo. It's just like it's
so
not permanent.
What were some of the answers that you got? What were some of the questions, and what were some of the answers?
Well, the typical one was where does God live? And most of the kids answered, well, in the sky. That's where God lives. It's up there. That was the most typical one. What was another one?
There were many interesting. For example, a small Jewish kid answered me that God, the best way to talk with God is in the car, because he has the time, he's relaxed, he opens the door and he chats with God.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. When his mom is crying all the time in the middle of the traffic, he's calm and he can talk with him. I have another answer from another kid that God is black. I said, black? Why black? Because we cannot see him. That's why he's black. Yeah, it's amazing. Here in the book I can just
I just
open.
want to
Yeah.
pick up the book so that we
Okay.
can hear to this camera. And read it in Spanish. It says,
It says Religión y Libertad en los Niños de México. That means religion and liberty or freedom in Mexican kids.
did all the kids believe in God? Was there anybody that didn't?
We find some, like, not many, but yeah, we find, how you call ateos?
Atheists?
Atheists, yeah. But we didn't really know if really they are, or they are, maybe they didn't know and they have any other
Yeah,
background.
maybe they didn't know there's influence from the parents, that they don't believe in God, so, oh yeah, I'm gonna...
You didn't know if it came from
Right,
them.
Yeah.
right. You don't know if it's influence from the parents. You know.
So what did you learn from this experience, going across Mexico? And was there a universality? Was there something that applied to all the kids, would you say?
I think it's, we can see in Mexico that religion is very important. It's not separate from the family. It comes together what they learn with the family values. And even they are from different kind of religions, yeah, most of the kids have this
Desire?
to believe in something different, to have something else.
Just like us?
Just like us. Yeah.
Not that different.
Yeah.
And the synagogues of Mexico, the Jews are mostly in Mexico City, are they?
Yeah. Yeah, most of the Jews, the majority of the Jews live in Mexico
But
City.
some of these synagogues are not.
Yeah, this, for example, is the first one. This is not in Mexico City, this is in Monterrey. It's north of Mexico, it's in the border with Texas. Maybe the community there are 5,000 Jews. Most of them are Ashkenaz. It's an Ashkenaz synagogue. It's a nice little synagogue. They have there the JCC, they have the school in the same place. Same thing in Guadalajara, that, but there are mixed Sephardics and Ashkenaz. And now they started as an Orthodox synagogue. Now they have in the same synagogue Orthodox and conservative services.
At the same time?
Not at the same time. They share
They
space.
alternate.
They alternate, yeah. Also, there is the synagogue in Tijuana, just in the border with the States.
Are there Jews in Tijuana?
Yeah, many, not many, but some of them are living in San Diego, but they work in Tijuana. And now it's the synagogue, there are not many Jews that still going to Tijuana. They prefer to stay in San Diego, but there are some Jews still in Tijuana. It was very interesting to be there. We spent 2 days, 2 days taking pictures there. This project was 10 years ago. Actually, now in Mexico City, maybe there are 7 or 8 new synagogues built.
Are there more people coming to Mexico City, or are they leaving? Jews leaving? Are there more leaving, or?
They still living there. There's not many left Mexico. But what happened in Mexico, they become more religious.
Okay, we'll get to that in just a minute. Stay with us. We're going to take a break. Hi, we're back. I'm Doris Epstein. This is Menschlife TV, and we're back with famous photographer and his soon-to-be famous son, Moy Volcovich and Gabrielle. You're famous for the pictures that you take of people. It's as though you capture their souls, the essence of who they are. I especially like the black and white, just to give you a taste. And children that are hard to do because they're pretty, they don't have that much expression. You do, amazingly, here's for a brief look.
Yeah. Actually, the book that you're having, it was my first one. Actually, here is Gabriel when he was 4 months old.
Ah.
Yeah. This project belongs to the neighbor where I was born. The name of the neighbors is Condesa, where many Jews lived for many years. Actually, my father, when he came from Poland, lived in downtown, and from downtown they moved to this little
in
Mexico City, and many Jews live there. I love this area. It's like very nice and private and specific. You can find everything there. You don't need to take your car to go to the drugstore or wherever. It's a nice place. I wanted to make like a project about my neighbor, and the idea came to do it like a lottery, like a bingo card. When I took pictures of many people that live in this neighborhood for many, many years. I bring them to my studio. That was the goal. Not take them in their place. Bring them as they are to my studio. Bring the doctor to my studio. Bring the photographer to the studio.
Is there a conscious process when you go to take a person's picture, which you're a master of? Is it an unconscious mechanism that takes over, or do you consciously look for certain things?
No, it's unconscious. It's something that I don't know, I have inside, and I don't tell them what to do. I just start talking, and whenever I feel comfortable, I start taking
And yet you
pictures.
describe yourself as a shy person.
Not with the camera. When I have my camera, I'm different. Yeah, it's like my safety net, escudo,
My shield.
my shield, yeah.
Are you still like that after so many years, or are you more at ease?
No, I'm still like that. Yeah.
Maybe that enhances your abilities. What about you? When you go,
Right.
even though you're so young, you're going to be 17,
Right.
but you already won an award for a documentary.
Right, it wasn't exactly an award, but my documentary is called El Pipiripao.
Oh, but it was in the Hot Docs
It
Festival.
was in the Hot Dogs Documentary Film Festival in Toronto, and I actually didn't even get to go to the festival because I was in the March of the Living, traveling in Israel and in Poland. But they told me it was great. They loved it. It's basically about just a synopsis about the story. It's a documentary about a guy in Acapulco in Mexico, and he basically talks about his life, his children, his life experiences, his beliefs, his values in life. And it's an interesting little film.
But you're hooked on filmmaking.
Yes.
One of the most competitive, hardest things to make a living at.
Yeah.
Did your father influence you?
Of course. Well, both my parents, my mom also, but my dad, ever since like we were young, we had a dark room in my house where we developed pictures, and it was so much fun to go there. And ever since we were young, we were taught to be creative and go out of the box and think for ourselves and be creative. So yeah, he's been a big influence.
Do you work together? You did this project for the Mexican government together.
Just this project. But we make we're going to have more projects in common. And,
hopefully.
Yeah.
Is he influencing you?
Yeah, sometimes, yeah.
So you're both really equal. You have a relationship that's very unusual, because in a working relationship, you're not father and son. It's the goal.
Yeah.
I think it links us both together. Like as a father-son also relationship, it's easier, I guess, to work with, because we know each other, we know how we work, we look out for certain things.
Does he say he knows best?
No.
Does he boss you around?
I know he knows best because he has experience, but no, he doesn't boss me around. He's cool with that.
You don't fight. No. You don't argue.
Not so much. No, now in computer and technology, I don't know anything.
And he knows. I'll bet he knows.
Yeah.
What are your plans? You're in Claude
My
Watson, the
plans.
Performing Arts School.
Yes, I'm in the Screen Arts program right there, so I'm in grade 11. I want to, actually in 2 weeks, we're going to head to New York. I want to check out NYU for the film program. That's my goal, to go to NYU to study filmmaking. So that's my goal.
And you, you studied photography in Israel?
Yeah, in Israel, Jerusalem, מכללת Hadassah. I'm studied there for 3 years. And before I make the Mechina, and before I went for a year in Kibbutz Nitzanim.
Have you toyed with the idea of staying in Israel ever?
Oh yeah, all the time. Yeah, I'm saying to my family that we make like Hatzi Aliyah. It's half Aliyah to Israel, from Mexico to Canada, and the next step maybe it's going to be Israel. Yeah, yeah. I still thinking to someday go to Israel.
And Mary, your wife, is a graphic designer?
Yeah, that's right.
That's why you said she influences you too.
Yeah, both my parents are really artistic and creative, so yeah, I got my influence from both of them.
Yeah, I remember Gabriel come to my studio in Mexico because I share the studio with my brother that he's a painter, and always he start drawing in canvases and painting and shooting. It was very free for him, especially for him because...
How do you feel about him going into this profession, this difficult, competitive profession?
I'm happy. In my experience, my parents never told me not to study photography. When I went to Israel, my idea was to study food engineering.
That's pretty safe.
Yeah. Yeah, but I was accepted to the Technion, but I decided that's not for me. I want I want to be a photographer. I applied for the Bezalel. I didn't get in, but I get to the מכללת Hadassah. I think it was better for me at the end, and I'm happy that I can work in the thing that I love to do. I'm not suffering being a photographer. You have the chance to see and to delight many different things. I was working my first year in Mexico in a hospital doing medical and surgery pictures. I even know if I was taking the brain or it was the knee. For me, it was the same. I just was taking pictures. But it was interesting to be part of. I also in Mexico I make many advertising work for lingerie, for catalogs, for food, for the synagogue project and many other. I was traveling a lot.
Your work is out of the ordinary too. Not only you capture the essence of a person, but it's highly imaginative. Tell us about what you're working on now.
The new project that I'm working, I started maybe like a year and a half ago in Canada. It calls the Milk Project. It's if you remember when they used.
So we just have 1 minute. Tell us quick.
Yeah, if you remember when they used the cartons,
the milk cartons for the missing children.
For the missing children. I think now as a society we're missing many values. And my idea is to take pictures of people and find these values that we are missing.
Famous people, to have pictures of famous, ordinary people.
Ordinary, famous,
something like what you ask the children. God, freedom, and what do they value most?
It's most of things asking what we as a society are missing.
Good question, and I wish you luck.
Thank you.
Moy and Gabriel Volcovich. I'm Doris Epstein. Don't forget, be a mensch.